Hello, everyone, and welcome into another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Monday, October 28th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking about that game that happened in College Station. A&M makes a big-time statement against LSU and really sets themselves up incredibly well for a CFP run. Then we'll get into a couple of big-time statement wins in Notre Dame and Bama. Notre Dame absolutely dominates Navy pretty much from start to finish. Bama, the exact same with Missouri, and a huge win for Bama just to get that confidence up as you head into a bye before a huge trip to Baton Rouge. Then we'll get to a couple of upset alerts, a ton of close calls all around the country. We'll talk about Ohio State, Texas, Kansas State, and SMU. All of them escaped, especially SMU. Somehow they were able to win that game against Duke. Then we'll get into all the other ranked teams, tell you about how they fared. Oregon really setting the pace at number one, really proving that they're the best team in the country, at least this week. Obviously, everything's changing week to week. Then we'll finish it off with just all the games we didn't have a chance to get to in the first part of the show. We'll finish it off with that, including a ton of updates from that really interesting game that happened up there in Blacksburg, Virginia. A huge win for Virginia Tech that keeps them ever so slightly in the ACC hunt. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat feature. At the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page, you can use that little $sign, add any question, comment you'd like, and that'll pop up on the screen, and we can have a fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be as interactive as possible. Getting into the home stretch of the season, any questions that y'all have, would love to answer. But let's go ahead and jump in here, and let's talk about that A&M win over LSU, because this was kind of a tale of two halves, wasn't it? It was a little bit all over the place in the first half for A&M, and then something very, very specific happened in the second half, and it was that quarterback change. It was a total game changer for this entire game. It was a game changer really for the entire year for A&M. At least that's what it seems right about now. But you make that change for very, very good reason. I mean, Connor Wegman was 6 for 18 in the first half, and early in the second half, they had really no identity on offense. And then they decided, we're going to run the ball. That's what we're going to do the rest of the game, and we're going to figure out if we can win that way. And man, can they. They outscored LSU 31-6 the rest of the way, really cemented themselves at the top of the SEC, and Marcel Reed became one of the most popular guys, probably the most popular guy on campus over there at College Station overnight. So, remarkable performance from him, obviously coming into a game where there's a whole lot of pressure on you, and you're coming in after halftime, you're not necessarily fully warm, scores on his very first play and doesn't really look back. Was playing really, really good football from start to finish in the second half, and I think the biggest thing you take away from this for the A&M and the LSU side for a number of different reasons is the adjustments that they made are such a testament to what this coaching staff is going forward. And it's such a testament to the buy-in that you've gotten even in year one from a lot of these guys around this locker room, because it would be very easy for this game to have gotten away from them. You know, LSU missed a couple opportunities in the first half to possibly push that thing to 16. If you push it to 16, maybe you keep Connor Wegman in the game because they know they have to pass the ball a little bit more consistently. So it's a little bit of a confusing kind of dance that LSU was on, but they missed a golden opportunity. There's no two ways about that. They were very much in this game, and the game just kind of got away from Garrett Nussmeier in the second half. Now, the big-time thing that everyone is kind of taking away now, there are quite a few people that are kind of burying Garrett Nussmeier for whatever reason, but when you get 1 yard per carry, you're not going to be very successful. There's going to be some forcing that happens. He threw 50 passes in this game, so that was bound to happen at some point. There was not going to be a really good way for him to be successful if they weren't going to be able to run the ball, and that's something that is going to follow them for the rest of the year. So they got to find it against Bama. They got to find it against the teams that they're going to play coming up, because if they don't, we've seen what this offense is, and it's very stagnant and a lot of mistakes happening. So they got a lot to figure out over there at LSU. For A&M, Reed is your guy. I think you know that going forward. Him and Colin Klein's system just makes much more sense. Colin Klein looks a lot more comfortable calling plays for a guy that has that athletic ability, has that running ability, kind of like Avery Johnson at Kansas State last year. A huge reason that they moved to him as the starter was because he fit in Colin Klein's system and he did things very, very efficiently because of his athletic ability. Marcel Reed's kind of a cut from the same cloth, and he did make 2 throws in the second half. He completed 2 passes, but at the end of the day, when you can run the ball that efficiently and you have so many guys to go to, like Le'Veon Moss, like Amari Daniels, and then obviously Marcel Reed, you're going to have a lot of success. And then on the other side, I think you talk about the LSU defense just briefly here. not knowing or not planning for this guy to play in the game is just outright ridiculous. It's one of those things that just cannot happen going forward, and it's one of those things that shouldn't have happened going into this game. Obviously, Connor Wegman was the starter. I don't think there was much question about that going into this one. You also knew that Marcel Reed played really good football for them. He went 2-0. It was 6 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, was very, very efficient during his time. The leash was not going to be very long. So not thinking about the backup getting into this game is a huge indictment on a lot of that defensive coaching staff, and something that I can't imagine is ever going to happen again for them, because this was very, very glaring that they didn't have a plan. It was obvious from the get-go. And then in the second half, the defense went to work as well. And a lot of that we talked about, being able to stop the run plays a huge portion in that. Being able to slow down the run and force Garrett Nussmeier to make a couple of the passes that are very, very tough and kind of get in the way of a lot of teams' success are absolutely something that are going to give you more opportunities to get picks. And Garrett Nussmeier made some bad decisions, but at the end of the day, when you're forced into those situations, bad decisions are going to come, especially for a young quarterback. We saw it even with Connor Wegman in the first half. He was a little all over the place because the game got a little bit fast, the emotions got to him just a little bit, and it became a little bit too much. And that's happened to pretty much every single quarterback in the entire country. And I think for LSU, it's much less about what Garrett Nussmeier can or can't do going forward. It's more about what you can do on the offensive side of the ball, running the ball. You badly have to be able to run the ball. You badly have to be able to push the ball downfield, and can't do that if you can't get the run game going. So Caden Durham's got to play a lot better. This offensive line that is incredibly good at pass blocking, although A&M was able to get home a couple of times, they're very, very good at pass blocking. They got to get better at run blocking. They just have to. If they're not going to be able to run the ball, then it's going to be a nightmare. And then on the other side, A&M said, we're going to run the ball and dare you to stop us, and LSU just couldn't. So a huge moment for A&M. You plant your flag at the top of the SEC. You really have a very clear path to Atlanta. You win out. You're very much on your way there. Now you do have that game at the end of the year against Texas, which the script writers get one step closer to that game being 10-1 against 10-1 for a spot in the SEC title. But at the end of the day, it's an absolutely huge game for A&M. It's one of those games that really shows you the difference that a coach could make at A&M. It was one of those programs that was sitting right under the surface for quite some time. They just needed the guy to come through the doors, and exactly what happened. It was actually incredible what Mike Elko has been able to do there, and definitely sets them up for remarkable amounts of success going forward, not just this season, but beyond, because this team is going to be talented, they're going to be well coached, and they're going to be in a position in the SEC to make a lot of noise. So really remarkable performance, obviously one that they very badly needed, plants their flag at the top of the SEC, and they can continue moving forward. They got to feel really confident about where they're at. Obviously, a huge one against South Carolina in a second, but at the end of the day, doing what they need to do and taking care of business on the biggest stages. So definitely a huge win for them, and how they were able to get it. The halftime changes can't be overstated. It's not an easy decision to go away from the quarterback that had played really good football for you, had put you in this position, got the huge win over Missouri at home, had done incredible things. It's not easy to pull the trigger and go the other direction, but they badly needed to. Before Marcel Reed entered, 7 points, 3.5 yards per carry, 3.5 yards per play. After Marcel Reed entered, 31 points, 8.6 yards per play. So they were very obviously just saying, we're going to run the ball, we're going to find our rhythm in our identity, and they were able to. They were able to get the run game going, adding that one extra player for the LSU team to think about in the run game made all the difference, and the LSU defense was not remotely ready for that. And then on the other side, defense forced 4 turnovers and gets a turnover on downs in the second half. So essentially, in my book at least, forced 5 turnovers. Absolutely dominance from the A&M defense in the second half, and they were all over Garrett Nussmeier in a world where he has not been very, very often in this in college football, because the offensive line in front of him has been one of the best units over the 2 years that he's played, even a little bit. It's been one of the best units in the country. He got sacked 3 times after not getting sacked at all this season, so a remarkable performance from that D-line, and that was part of it. A&M's D-line did not give them any running room, also didn't give them much passing room for Garrett Nussmeier to work with, but LSU, 24 yards on 23 carries, that can't be the way you go about business. If you're going to throw the ball 50 times a game, Garrett Nussmeier is going to make mistakes. That is part of who he is. That's part of every young quarterback. If you're going to make him throw the ball 50 times against a defense with that many athletes on the back end, he's going to make mistakes. He's going to throw picks, and you're going to put yourself in a bad spot. you have to be able to run the ball. Plain, simple, period. If LSU cannot run the ball, they are not getting to the CFP. If they can run the ball against Alabama, then they're putting themselves in a really good spot going forward. But they definitely couldn't on Saturday, and it really came back to bite them. And then finally, A&M just played to their strength. They said, we do not need to pass the ball downfield. We don't need the pop plays. We don't need to attack this back end that probably could be attacked. But at the end of the day, they weren't doing it very effectively. They said, we're going to complete 8 passes in the game, 3 total in the second half, 2 after the quarterback change happens, and we're still going to win. We're going to run all over you, and we're going to get 24 points off turnovers, and this thing is going to change in a hurry, and that's exactly what happened. So huge amount of respect to Mike Elko for not forcing things, because going into halftime, if they were down 16, if LSU made those 2 field goals, I think it totally changes the approach for A&M going into that second half. They're probably thinking, we got to throw the ball a little bit more often. Maybe you get a couple of mistakes from Marcel Reed, or they keep Connor Wegman in there and he continues to not necessarily play the best football. So it was a lot of things that went wrong for LSU, a lot of things that went right for A&M, but at the end of the day, they get a huge win. They continue to move forward, and for LSU, I think the way you go from here is, this one's tough. There's no doubt about that, but at the end of the day, you are still in a very good position, at least in terms of making it to the CFP. You do have to win out. You've lost your margin for error, and that is very, very tough. But at the end of the day, you got a huge one against Alabama in a couple of weeks. You win that one, there's not a game on your schedule that you can't win. You have Florida, Vandy, and OU to finish out the year. You should be able to win all those games. Obviously, a lot of questions around this team. If you can't run the ball, then things get a little sketchy. But at the end of the day, not a lot changed about the way that I think about LSU. Definitely feel a little bit worse about this team going forward in terms of the changes that need to be made. But as of right now, they're playing really good football. They had a bad hiccup on Saturday. And if they get back on track during this bye week, they'll be more than fine. And then for A&M, I don't think it has to be said. They're an SEC contender, they're a CFP contender, and they very well could be a title contender. The one question that I do have is this offense under Marcel Reed obviously is going to run the ball. They're going to be very aggressive on the ground. When they go into a game where the defense is fully prepared for that, what does that look like? Because we've seen it in the past. It has worked out at different times. The defense was able to win them a couple of those games. So that game in South Carolina this upcoming weekend is going to tell us a lot of stuff. If they're able to win that one, they are fully on their way to being in a showdown for a spot in the SEC title at the end of the year against Texas. So a huge win for A&M, puts in perspective just how incredible that program could be under a coach that is actually meant to be there. Mike Oko's meant to be there. Absolutely incredible job by him in his first year, and it's not over yet. Still plenty to play for. If they lose that game this upcoming weekend, then a lot of things become sketchy in a hurry. But right now, they're on top of the SEC. They're on top of the world in a lot of ways, and they continue moving forward. But let's take our first break here. And when we come back, we got to talk about Notre Dame and Alabama. It felt like they made some statements this past weekend as well. Notre Dame getting a big win over Navy, as well as Alabama just dominating Missouri from start to finish. So we'll break those down right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about that huge win for Texas A&M at home against LSU. Sets them up really, really well for that CFP, possibly even setting up a matchup against Texas at the very end of the year for a spot in the SEC title, which is, I think what we all want. It would be absolutely incredible, and that place would be even more on fire than it was yesterday. But let's get into a couple other games here and a couple other teams that made some big-time statements. Notre Dame as well as Alabama got just massive dominating wins and kind of proved a little bit in the process. I think Notre Dame a little bit more than Alabama for some reasons that I'll get into throughout this. But this was one of those games where there were a lot of different things that could have gone wrong for Notre Dame. You know, it was one of those teams that had the ability to kind of possess the ball, run it, keep everything really close, and then that one big play could have totally changed this game. Notre Dame buried them from the jump. It was not even remotely close, and it was the game that finally Notre Dame has officially earned back my respect because it took them a while. It was one of those things that you watch that NIU game. It is a very, very hard thing to get out of your mouth, taste to get out of your mouth. But at the end of the day, they were able to get a dominating win here against a team that I at least thought was going to cause them more troubles. I thought Notre Dame was going to win this game, but at the end of the day, I thought it was going to be a little bit more grinded out than it was. They were up 17-0 before I even knew what happened. So Notre Dame absolutely dominated this one. They had 2 punts, 1 missed field goal, and a drive that ended the game. Other than that, every single time they touched the ball, they scored. It was absolutely beautiful. Pretty much went exactly how they would have scripted it. It was absolutely perfect. They dominated in the defensive game, did not allow anything downfield, and it was one of those games where, we'll talk about it here in a second, but Navy needed a couple big pass plays. They just had to have them, one way or the other, and they were not able to get them. And then on the offensive side for Notre Dame, 40 rushes, 6.6 yards per carry, over 200 yards passing, no turnovers, and you force 6. You're going to win a lot of games that way. It was absolute domination from start to finish. Riley Leonard looks a lot more comfortable throwing the ball. It's no longer, just finding it at different points of the game when you have openings. It's him kind of tearing the ball. It's him very confidently throwing the ball downfield and being very, very convicted in the way that he's going about business, which is absolutely huge for this team. And then, obviously, the magic of that Navy season kind of comes to an end. There's still plenty to play for. They're still very much in play for that American title. They have Army, and that Army-Navy matchup could be back-to-back with that conference title and then right after. Still plenty of things that can happen for this Navy team, including possibly finding their way into the CFP. Obviously, it's going to be a lot harder to do it now, and Army is a team that is going to be really tough to beat at the end of the year. But as of right now, they look like a team that's still very much in the hunt for the American, but the back end of that schedule is a little bit sketchy, and we'll get into that here in a second. But how Notre Dame was able to get this win, we talked about it. No big pass plays was a huge thing because obviously Navy's going to run the ball. We all understand that. That is the way that they're going to go about their business. The reality was they had to hit a couple of big plays in this game through the air if they were going to win this one. There was no way that they were going to be able to just grind it out through the ground, and they went 7 for 14, 88 yards and a pick, and a long pass of 32 yards. That was never going to be a winning formula. Frankly, if you showed me that on Friday, I would have felt very confident that it was going to be some type of this type of score because Navy was absolutely going to have to get a couple of big-time pass plays downfield, and Notre Dame just totally shut that down from start to finish. And then on Notre Dame's side, a three-headed monster of absolute dominating players. You had Jeremiah Love running the ball, 12 carries, 102 yards, 2 touchdowns. Riley Leonard, 10 carries, 83 yards and a touchdown. Kedron Young, 10 carries, 52 yards and a touchdown. Remarkable stuff. And Jadarian Price didn't even get too many carries in this game, and they were absolutely dominating on the ground. They did everything you possibly could have wanted. And that Jeremiah Love kid, he's remarkable. He's one of those guys that coming out next year, he's a sophomore right now, so coming out into the NFL draft next year, very well could be running back 1 because the dude is just absolutely remarkable in every aspect of the game. And then finally, something that Notre Dame's just going to have to do the rest of the way, they spread the ball out, especially in the pass game. 9 different players caught a pass, 3 players over 40 yards receiving. It's not going to be flashy. It's not going to hit you over the head. It's not going to be a guy getting 150 through the air. It is going to be enough. That's all they need to do. They know they have the physicality advantage, especially in this game and really in every game coming up. They're going to have a physicality advantage. Run the ball and then pick your moments in the pass game. And if Riley Leonard's throwing the ball with that amount of confidence, you're going to have quite a bit of success in the pass game. So overall, huge win for Notre Dame, moves them on, continues that ride to the CFP possibly, and where they go from here, I think Navy are not technically out of it. You're still in the CFP race. Obviously, the back end of your schedule is a rather tough one. No doubt about that. They do have Rice this upcoming weekend that just fired their head coach, Mike Bloomgren. definitely an interesting one of those things that you could have a little bit of a bounce for Rice, but expect them to win that one. They go to South Florida, and then they play Tulane. That is a game that they very badly have to win. If they can't win that one, then it's not going to be them in the American title facing off against possibly Army at the end of the year. So a lot of things fell off the table for Navy this past weekend, but still plenty to play for. If they can get to the American title with one loss, beat Army maybe twice in a row, there's a world where they find their way into the playoff. Now, probably need a couple of things to go their way at this point, but still a very, very impressive team and one that is having a really remarkable season. And then for Notre Dame, you're off running. You're doing exactly where you're supposed to be in the CFP race with the power in your hands. Going to a bye this upcoming weekend is huge just to get your mind right for the home stretch, but you got Florida State, you got Virginia, you got Army, and then you finish off with USC. All those games should be wins. I feel pretty confident saying that. Now, the USC and Army game at the end of the year could get a little bit sketchy. That Florida State game, I don't expect to get remotely sketchy for Notre Dame, if I'm being totally honest. But moving forward to that Alabama game, they just dominated Missouri from the absolute jump of this game. They were all over the place, and right as the Alabama haters were trying to bury them just a little bit, Alabama comes right back and puts on maybe one of their better performances of the entire year. One of their definitely their most complete performance of the entire year. I feel pretty confident saying that. But for Missouri, obviously injuries really hurt them here. There's no doubt about that. You lose Brady Cook. You don't have Nate Noel going into this game. A couple other guys get banged up throughout it. Does not help by any means. But Alabama, you handle your business. You did exactly what you're supposed to do against a team that's struggling the way that Missouri is under the conditions that Missouri is in. You dominate them. That's what you're supposed to do from start to finish, and that's exactly what they did do. And I think the biggest thing that stood out to me was Bama seems to have found themselves, because for really going back to last year, but specifically just keeping it to this year, what they've wanted to be for a very, very long time around there, and what they can be if you give just the personnel on a piece of paper, what they should be able to do is run the ball. They should be able to control the line of scrimmage, run the ball very, very aggressively, pick their spots with Jalen Milroe in the pass game, and just be a team that just wears you down. That's the way that they're supposed to go about business, and they finally were able to in this game. 37 rushes, 26 passes. I think even the margin could be a little bit more aggressive than that, and Bama fans would be more than fine with it. But overall, when you get all three of those running backs involved, three guys that are just absolute stars in the making, just haven't had the openings that they needed, you're going to have a lot of success. It's been absolutely remarkable to watch these guys, and it feels like this offense, although it's been at times a little clunky, and it feels like it's gone kind of backwards and forwards and backwards again a number of different times this season, if they find that run game going forward, it's going to be a remarkably hard group to stop. You know, the wide receivers are not necessarily where they're the most deep or where they're the most talented in this team. I think that running back room is as talented as there is really in the entire country. They just haven't been able to unlock them yet. And we saw it with Justice Haynes literally just running through a guy's face, Richard Young just doing incredible things on that big-time run, and so many different things to like about this team in the run game. They got to be able to find it going forward. Along with Jalen Milroe, they have so many guys that can hurt you with their legs, and it's one of those things that can totally open up this team going forward. And then you go to the other side of the ball. You were able to run the ball incredibly well. That's huge. The defense was flying around, only allowing 72 yards passing, forcing 3 turnovers. I understand it was the backup quarterback. I understand Drew Pine's not necessarily the star in the making that a lot of the other people the guy that they'll play probably in 2 weeks, and Garrett Nussmeier very much is. But at the end of the day, they did what they were supposed to do. And that's kind of the goal of this game. When you had all those injuries going in, when you knew Missouri was a little bit underhand going into it, you knew you had to take care of business, and you knew you had to dominate, and Kane Womack and his defense are starting to turn a little bit of a corner. It'll be very interesting to see what they can do against a team like LSU, that it has the ability to pass all over the field and can do it time and time again and have a ton of success. It'll be fascinating to watch that unfold over the next couple of weeks, but as of right now, it's really hard to be angry about where Alabama is defensively or really offensively going forward. That is if you buy into the whole run game sticking around. But they were able to find it in this game, and that was a huge reason for their win. This is who Bama is supposed to be. They have 4 rushers over 40 yards, 7.3 yards per carry. Haynes, Milroe, and Miller all got into the end zone. And then Richard Young, dude's going to be a star. He's so much fun to watch. He's one of those guys that you've been seeing just sitting on the bench, just waiting for a moment. when he gets the ball in his hands, it's very obvious that he is a different type of athlete. And I think he's going to be an absolute problem going into 2025, but he could be a huge piece this year, just kind of as a change of pace type person. He's not going to be used a ton by any means, and likely will be used kind of in these circumstances when they're pulling away from teams, which we'll see how much happens the rest of the way. Hadn't happened a lot going into this game, but at the end of the day, if you can find that run game, if you can get Justice Haynes and Jermarion Miller and Jalen Milroe running downfield, there's not a lot of defenses in the country that are going to be able to stop those three guys. I feel pretty good about that. And then the back-end defense was huge, regardless of the quarterback you're facing. 73 yards passing, 3 interceptions is a dominating performance, and it's one of those things that they badly needed. It's just a confidence booster for this team as they head into a game where they're going to get passed on quite a bit. They have to be ready, and they have to feel confident in their abilities going into that game. So cannot say enough how much that meant. And then they followed the formula. There was a lot of different things that Bama has been doing on offense throughout the first parts of this year, and there are a lot of ways that they could go about business the rest of the way. The formula should be 37 rushes, over 250 yards on the ground, and just handling business that way, because that is the way you want to go about it really the rest of the way. Now, can you against teams that are a little bit better against the run? We'll find out. I think LSU is maybe slightly better against the run than Missouri. They should be able to run the ball pretty effectively against LSU. And then you get into a couple other games throughout the rest of the season. You get into a game even against Auburn. If you're not able to run the ball in that game, there's a world where this offense kind of stagnates again. So there's something to watch throughout the rest of the season. If that Alabama run game is working, watch out. They absolutely can get their name back into the CFP hunt as well as possibly a title hunt. If it doesn't necessarily, if this is a little bit of a dead cat bounce and they can get a little bit going for 1 week and then fall back off a cliff against LSU, we know who this team is. So a lot of things still up in the air. It doesn't necessarily change a ton about my opinion for Alabama, but at the end of the day, you're going to a bye week. You have LSU on the other side. It's a huge one. You badly needed this one you needed it just to be in the hunt, but at the end of the day, you also needed it for a confidence booster. You beat LSU. Outside of that, you got Mercer, at Oklahoma, and Auburn. You should be able to win all those games. So in 2 weeks, we could just have a game that is, if Alabama wins, they're in it. If LSU wins, they're in it. So it's going to be incredible to watch that one, and we'll get to that one in a couple of weeks here. But at the end of the day, for Missouri, I think this is the knockout blow. I would love to tell you that they have the ability to get back into the fight, but I think 10-2 is just not going to be enough. Maybe it'll give you a shot depending on how the chips will fall, but you look at the just log jam that is at the top of the SEC. I can't imagine they're getting past a 10-2 Texas if that were to happen, or a 10-2 A&M if that were to happen, or even a 10-2 Georgia. There's so many different variables here, as you can see, that I don't think Missouri is going to get in. I think that's probably the knockout punch. Frankly, the fact that they're even in the AP Top 25 is just outright ridiculous. But that's beside the point. For Alabama, run the ball. If you're able to run the ball, you're going to be very successful. If you're not able to run the ball and you fall off a little bit of a cliff in 2 weeks from now, it's going to be tough, and you're going to end up being 9-3, probably 9-3 at the end of the year. 8-4 would be a little bit of a disaster, but at the end of the day, there's still a lot on the table for Alabama. They got the win that they badly needed. They got a confidence booster. They got a dominating win when they felt like they just couldn't get dominating wins at all, and now they move forward to a game that could very well just decide what their season is. If they win at LSU, then I very much like them to make the CFP. If they lose in that game, then there's almost no shot that they're making the CFP. So a huge game in a couple of weeks, but they get to go into a bye, catch their breath, figure out where they are, and then attack that game with full force. But let's take our second break here, and when we come back, we got to talk about a couple of close calls around the country, because there were quite a few, including 4 ranked teams that just escaped with wins. All of them felt like at some point they were going to lose that game. They were able to handle it, and we'll talk about Ohio State and Texas mainly right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about Alabama and Notre Dame making some pretty big time statements this past weekend. Now, you can take it kind of as you want, especially with that Alabama game with a couple of injuries on the other side. You can take it as you please. But I do think it was a huge confidence booster for the Tide as they head into a bye before what could be just a season definer against LSU in a couple of weeks. But let's get into a couple upset alerts around the country because there were quite a few that got a little bit sketchy towards the end of their game, and they were able to pull it out. Really, all of these teams were able to pull it out, but it got close there for a second, and we'll start with that Ohio State game because this one got weird in a hurry. It felt like early on in that second quarter, late in that second quarter, it felt like Ohio State was going to be able to pull away. It felt like they were going to be able to make the explosive plays downfield. Felt like they had the guys to just get it done. Not necessarily have to worry too much. Their defense was going to be able to handle business. And frankly, their defense did handle business. They played really good football pretty much from start to finish in this one. Had a couple of lapses that weren't taken advantage of, which was another huge reason that Nebraska was not able to win this one, which is just a story as old as time around Nebraska, but I have a much rosier look on the season for Nebraska going forward, but I'll talk about that here in a second. For Ohio State, I think a lot of the same worries that you had last year offensively still sit there. I think when you talk about this team, if they're not able to run the football, they're not going to be successful at all. And in the past, when you had a guy like C.J. Stroud, when you had a guy like Dwayne Haskins, or you had a guy like Justin Fields, you knew teams had to respect it. You knew teams had to say, okay, we know this guy can tear us to pieces. If we're not careful on the back end of this defense, we have to be able to at least sit a couple of guys back in coverage. With Will Howard, they're not nearly as scared. And that's why you see some of the guys running deep over the middle of the field. You see a Jeremiah Smith just get lost for a defense. It's because they're worried much more about the run than the pass, and with that, big plays are going to come. And Ohio State took advantage of some of those big plays in this game. That being said, he can't just make all of the plays. Will Howard is not going to be a guy that is ever going to be in a position where you have no run game going, but he goes for 400 yards, 5 touchdowns, and wins you a game outright. That is not the quarterback that he is. That's not the quarterback that you brought him in to be. You have to be able to run the football. If Ohio State cannot run the football, maybe more than really anyone else in the country, weirdly enough, they're not going to be able to be successful. They have two of the best running backs in the entire country in Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. Losing Josh Simmons on the left side of that offensive line obviously is a huge effect on this team, but you got to figure it out. Every single team in the country has some type of injury on some part of their offense that is hugely important. Everyone's got to deal with this. You are a team that your big time thing was we are as deep a team in the country, we are as talented of a roster in the country. This is the time to prove it. This is the time to prove that you have that depth, that you have all of the guys that you need to go on and finish out this season, go win a Big Ten title, and move on and continue on your way. Now, you're going into a game against Penn State this upcoming weekend where you play that level of football, you're getting beat by 20 points, and this entire season blows up in flames. That's just the reality. There's no way you're beating a Penn State team if you're running 2.1 yards per carry. Just not going to happen. So there's so many things that you're going to have to fix up. There's so many things that you're going to have to figure out. And any Ohio State fan that thinks they're just going to outright win games by throwing the ball with Will Howard, you're in for a rude awakening. I'm just going to be totally honest because this is going to get ugly in a hurry if that's the way you're going to go forward. So they got away with one. It was absolutely huge that they did because Nebraska had chances to win this game and they left them on the table. But at the end of the day, Ohio State lives to fight another day. They go into one next week where if they play this level of football, they are going to be maybe even out of the CFP race, but that's a total conversation for another day. But at the end of the day, a huge one to just get away from with a win. That was kind of the biggest thing to take away from this is Ohio State, you scored more points than the opponent. And at the end of the day, that's all you can ask for with a performance that gross on offense. So you'll take it, you'll move forward. If you don't play better football on Saturday, your season goes up in flames, and maybe Ryan Day's future at Ohio State goes up in flames. But for Nebraska, I think this was a huge win a huge game for this program. Shouldn't say win. Hate to give them that. But at the end of the day, a huge game for this program. Matt Rule talked about it right after the game. He said it felt like they were seeing some of the things that they had been preaching for quite some time around there. And it really felt like that. It felt like a team that, I'll be totally honest, early on, or in the second half, going into halftime, really, I was sitting there saying, okay, Nebraska's held tough. I've seen this a movie before. They fight for a half, they fight for a little bit, and then Ohio State's able to pull away. That did not happen. And I think it was a lot of just Nebraska being the tougher team in a lot of different ways. And that's another issue with Ohio State that has been following them for quite some time. But they got to play better. They have to be able to win that game next week, because technically you don't need to win it to get to the CFP. But let's be totally honest. If Ryan Day wants a job in Columbus, Ohio next year, he badly needs to win that game. He badly needs to win the rest of the games on that schedule, or things are going to get ugly in a hurry. So Ohio State gets the win. That's all you can take away from this game. They get the win. Nebraska, I think you proved a lot in that game, and you can continue moving forward feeling good about what you are. And Ohio State, you live to fight another day. And now you got to regroup, play much better football next week, or this thing's going to get away from you in a hurry. Another top 5 team that played a game that, weirdly enough, this was one that could have been comfortable for Texas. They absolutely could have pulled away in this game and taken care of business, but they really tried to lose this game every which way from Tuesday. They did just about everything in their power to find a way to lose this game, because every time they got something going offensively, it was the O-line making a bad mistake in pass coverage, or missed assignments, or holding, or whatever it was. Or they got a pick 6 late in this game that would have buried it and made it look a lot better. And then Vernon Broughton gets a targeting call. So it's just things that are fully in Texas' control, that they're finding a way to get teams back in games. And Vanderbilt played good football. I'm not necessarily taking anything away from what Vanderbilt did, because they fought their tails off. And the fact that they are not a top 25 team in Missouri is right now is absolutely insane. But at the end of the day, a really, really impressive team, and it's one of those things that whenever you face Vanderbilt, it's going to be tough. I think Texas made it a little bit tougher on themselves than they had to. So a lot of those things can be fixed in the bye week that's coming up for them. So hopefully that's something that they can do for their sake as they move forward the rest of the way. But as of right now, I think you look back at that game, you see that Quinn Ewers had 2 picks. Neither of those picks were on him. Both were blocking assignment issues. One, obviously the second one looks a little bit worse on him. The reality is, a free rusher, if he makes that play, he makes that play. That tip can go any number of directions. It just happened to go into another Vandy player's arm. So there's plenty of reasons to worry about Quinn Ewers going forward. The performance yesterday is not one of them. I can promise you that. He played really good football, and those 2 mistakes were very far from his fault. I can promise you that. But at the end of the day, you come away with a win, a very gross win, and you come away with another win because your defense just is able to gut it out. They were handed so many short fields the same way they were against Georgia, and they were able to handle it the same way they were against Georgia. They forced 3 turnovers on an offense that I believe Diego Pavia only had 1 turnover going into this game. So really, really good stuff from that side of the ball. It's hard to be remotely angry at the Texas defense after this one, because they played incredible, flew all around the field, played very aggressively. These defenders on Texas absolutely have steam coming out of their ears when they play football, because they fly downhill and they really hit you. But at the end of the day, Vandy deserves a ton of respect here. It was one of those games that very easily could have gotten away from them, and they didn't allow it to. Texas obviously gave them a couple of chances, but Vandy took them and ran with them, and Texas didn't take advantage of a lot of I believe they had 0 points off turnovers. So gives you an idea of just how much of a difference there was in just opportunistic football. And Texas missed the mark a lot on the offensive side of the ball, and a little bit of an issue is forming around that offense, because you don't have an offensive line that is going to be blocking consistently. That quick pass game becomes a little bit more important, and then the quick pass game turns into possible picks because guys can read those and jump those routes. So a lot of things to figure out. If Texas cannot get that play action offense where they're throwing the ball 15, 20 yards downfield going, they're not going to be a team that's going to make the CFP. I feel pretty good about that, because there's going to be a couple of teams that are just going to take that away and say, beat us underneath, and they haven't been able to do that at least consistently with these elite teams. So it's going to be something to watch going forward. I think they'll be more than fine, but there's definitely some things that are not necessarily super readily fixable. You'll have to figure it out during the bye week, and then you got Florida coming out of it. We'll see what happens there. For Vandy, a little bit of a tough finish, no doubt about that for this team. When you have LSU and Tennessee still on the docket, it's going to be tough. I think 7 wins would be great. 8 wins would be absolutely remarkable. Regardless, this has been a huge season for Vanderbilt and should set themselves up for really a great amount of success going forward. For Texas, you got away with one, and your bye comes at the very perfect time, and you can move forward feeling at least okay, but this one was ugly. No doubt about that, and you're going to have to be able to figure out some of those things that can be figured out in the bye week, but if they're not, then you come out of the bye week against a Florida team that playing some pretty good football. Got to be very careful. But overall, you get the win, you keep moving forward, you keep that hope alive, and stay near the top of the SEC. And then we'll move over to the Big 12 because Kansas State escaped. Frankly, I don't know how this happened because you look at the box score in a number of different ways. It is hard to find a way that Kansas was able to stick in this game. Kansas State had 229 on the ground, 253 through the air. It should have been a blowout win. It was exactly the way that you probably would have drawn it up if you were going to get a blowout win, but the safety was the difference here, which is absolutely insane. But at the end of the day, they were able to get the win here, and it's kind of an encapsulation of Kansas season just overall. Had plenty of chances to go out and win this game, had plenty of chances, the ability to win it, and then you come up short because of self-inflicted wounds. It's just the way that this season has gone for Kansas, and it's one of those things that's probably going to haunt them for quite some time because you look forward at the rest of the schedule. 3 wins is very much on the table for this Kansas team. A year after you felt very good about the future of your program, you're now questioning a lot. You hate to see it. It was one of those games that we talked about last week, could have been kind of a one-game season salvager. It was not that by any means. It went the opposite direction for Kansas. But overall, for Kansas State, you survive. It was tough. And we've talked about this before on here. There are going to be Big 12 moments, especially in this last month as we get into a lot of the craziness. There's going to be some Big 12 moments out there. There's going to be some games where you have no business losing, you're favored by double digits, and a team just finds a way to beat you. Avoiding those is the number one goal, and Kansas State was able to avoid one on Saturday. That's the end goal. You're able to get out with a win, but for Kansas, a tough season gets tougher. You got Iowa State and BYU coming out the next 2 weeks, so I don't think it's going to get all that pretty. It's going to be a very, very ugly finish to the season, and Kansas, I still think, has a great head coach. I still think can move forward from this, but a lot of resetting to do in this offseason, no doubt about that. For Kansas State, you're in a great spot moving forward. You have Houston, then you have a bye, then Arizona State, another bottom feeder in that conference. You got Cincinnati, and then a huge one at the end of the year in Ames, Iowa, for that possibly a spot in the Big 12 championship and maybe even a spot in the CFP. So it's going to be remarkable to watch the rest of this season unfold for Kansas State, but you escaped with one, no doubt about that, and you were able to at least get a win and move forward and stay in the craziness that is the Big 12. And then we got SMU. This is the weirdest one of the bunch. There were a lot of games that I just talked about that I have no earthly idea how one team was able to win or how one team was able to keep it close. I know how Duke was able to keep it close. I have no earthly idea how they weren't able to win this game. SMU lost the turnover battle, not 2-0, not 3-0, 6-0 in this game. They gave the ball away 6 times to Duke, and Duke scored 27 points in the entire game. It's absolutely remarkable. It's almost a Herculean feat to find a way to take the ball away 6 times and only score 27 points and lose in overtime. And they lost because they had a field goal blocked at the very end of regulation. Just terrible. It's one of those games that Duke's going to look back on. Every single player on that team is going to look back on for years to come, just saying, how? How did that possibly happen? How did we let that game slip away? Because the reality was you probably could have kicked field goals on all of those picks. You're probably winning pretty comfortably by probably double-digit points in this game, but you couldn't get it done. And SMU wins in overtime. Somehow they win in overtime. But for SMU, without R.J. Maryland, this offense is just different. They don't necessarily have the guy that they feel confident going to. They were able to hit a couple of big-time plays to Robert Daniels that made all the difference in the world, but as of right now, they do not have a very good pass game, and it's something that they're badly going to need to figure out. They got to find that another number one guy because R.J. Maryland was huge for that offense, and losing him was very, very glaringly obvious. And then for Duke was in a position where they found a way to lose this game. And I think there were a number of different things that could have gone wrong or could have gone right for them in the last little bit, because you look at the final couple of drives from SMU, it went INT, fumble to finish regulation. That was the way that they finished, and they find a way to escape. They find a way to block a field goal, get to overtime, knock down a 2-point conversion, and that was about it. It was absolutely insane, and now he set up a huge matchup against Pitt next week. It's one of those matchups that absolutely will define what the ACC is going forward, and very well could send one of those teams to the CFP and one of those teams home. It'll be incredible to watch that one unfold, but for Duke, you're going to want this one back. You had 2 missed field goals. You had 2 turnovers on downs. It's really tough stuff all the way around. But a win at Miami would totally flush that away. So maybe you can get back on the horse, but this one's tough. For SMU, you keep your season alive, and that's the most important thing. You have a huge one this upcoming weekend with Pitt at home, and then you got BC, Virginia, and Cal to finish the season. You win that Pitt game, going to be hard to not see them possibly making a CFP run. So a lot on the table for SMU still, even though this was one of the more ugly performances they had all year. They very badly need to figure out that pass game without RJ Maryland. For Texas, you got to figure out that pass game just in general. That offensive line needs to play a whole lot better. Quinn Ewers needs to be a little bit better at identifying rushes and getting guys where they need to be. Just little things that absolutely can be fixed in the bye week, and they could come out, dominate Florida, and be right back where they need to be. But as of right now, some holes can be poked in those teams that didn't feel like they could be a couple of weeks ago. So definitely something to watch as we head on the rest of the season, as we get into the home stretch that is November. Going to be a nightmare to deal with. But at the end of the day, let's take our third break here. And when we come back, we just got to talk about all the other ranked matchups. Oregon really planting their flag as the number 1 team in the country. Penn State getting a really weird and gritty win over Wisconsin that earned a lot of respect from me at the very least, and a ton more that we'll talk about right after this.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of those upset alerts from around the country. Texas and Ohio State have some answers to give, no doubt about that. Texas going into a bye week, which makes you feel a little bit better. Ohio State, you head right over to State College to play maybe the biggest game of the season. So it's going to be a lot of interesting stuff happening over the next little bit for those teams, and we'll see if they can continue to stave off elimination and stay in the CFP hunt. But let's get to all the other ranked matchups, because there were quite a few and some big-time takeaways from some of these games, and the biggest one was probably from this one. Oregon just went to work. It was one of those games that a lot of people, including myself, pegged as one of those that just the slightest bit sketchy. You know, that game against Purdue last week, a lot of people talked about that one as a dangerous game for them. The reality was, it probably wasn't all that dangerous. Just the Big Ten and all of the different things that have happened over the years around that university, around that stadium, have made us a little bit nervous about those games. But this was the one that could have gotten a little bit sketchy for them, and it was never in doubt. They absolutely dominated from start to finish, and the big thing for me, as you've seen Oregon go on throughout this season, the things that we worried about early on in the season have become strength for this team. The O-line that was without Matthew Bedford to start the season is dominating teams in every single way. If you saw the score by Tez Johnson late in that game, I don't know how much time Dylan Gabriel had, but it looked like he could have set up, had a 5-course dinner, and then made the pass for a touchdown. It was absolutely incredible, the protection that he had on that play. And overall, on the defense, you forced 2 INTs on a guy that rarely missteps. They've been doing really, really good on the back end of that defense. That was another worry of mine. With a lot of new transfer guys coming in, you never really know how it's going to land. Didn't necessarily work all that pretty in the first part of the season. They're really finding themselves, and it's been really impressive to watch. The Illinois story does kind of come to an end. I think 10-2 probably still gets you a seat at the table. A loss to Penn State, or at Penn State and at Oregon, shouldn't disqualify you, but I mean, you look at all the log jams around the conferences around the country, it's hard to say that it wouldn't. It's one of those things that we're getting deeper and deeper into the season, and people just keep winning. BYU keeps winning. Iowa State keeps winning, and you keep having a lot of teams that, hypothetically, an Illinois team shouldn't be out of it. They're probably out of it. 10-2 is one of those, it's pretty much becoming the moniker for the CFP or for not the CFP, and it's going to be interesting to watch the rest of the way, no doubt about that. But a huge performance from Oregon. Kind of proves that they are the number 1 team in the country. While a lot of teams out there were struggling, they were taking care of business, and a Big Ten berth almost looks like a certainty at this point. They got Michigan this upcoming weekend, so we'll see what happens there. But as of right now, this very much looks like the team that is setting the pace in the country, and very much looks like the team that is going to win that Big Ten title. But Penn State's going to have plenty to say about that. And this was a very, very weird game because another team that just found a way to win under really, really bad circumstances because Drew Aller, I don't really know what happened to him. Been very, very hush-hush about his status going forward and what will happen this upcoming weekend, which is pretty much the decider of how I go in that game. If I'm being totally honest, if Drew Aller's on the field, I might just lean towards Penn State. If he's not on the field, I definitely do not lean towards Penn State. But Bo Pribula deserves a ton of respect for what he did in this game. 11 for 13, 98 yards, 1 touchdown, just huge for a backup quarterback coming into a place where it is not easy to play. You know, there's a ton of different things you can take away from this game, and I get being worried about the slow starts for this Penn State team, something that I'm very worried about as they head on to the rest of the season. But you're playing in Madison. It's very, very tough. You're playing against a defense that is very good at pinning people in and not giving up those big-time plays. It was I don't want to say a certainty, but definitely a very real reality that they were going to be struggling at halftime and then had to find themselves in the second half. And that's exactly what happened. They just had to do it with a backup quarterback. And I think the biggest thing for me was the defense was really, really incredible. And now, obviously, you're going to have to face some big-time guys in the next couple of weeks, and we'll see what happens when they face Ohio State receivers. But this back end, this entire defense is just as athletic as there is in the country. They fly around the field. They make plays all over the place. And when you have Abdul Carter on the front end, when you have a lot of the guys in the middle that are just incredible, and then you have guys like Jalen Wright on the back end, it's going to be a problem to get anything going against this Penn State defense. So we'll see what happens. I think they need Drew Aller to beat Ohio State. I think they need to be able to push the ball downfield, and let's just be totally honest, they're not going to worry about that if Drew Aller's not in that game. So something that's going to have to be talked about the rest of the week, and we'll definitely keep you updated as more information comes out. But at the end of the day, a huge win under some not great circumstances, definitely one that Penn State badly needed, and they made it look pretty good. Even after a first half that was fairly ugly and a backup quarterback coming in, they were able to get a double-digit win. Huge win for them, and definitely one that makes me feel a lot better about having them at number 3, at least in my rankings going forward. And then you got Miami. They finally got the one that they needed. They finally got the one where they were able to roll in, run the football, get a 2-3 touchdown win, and just get out of town. That was the ultimate goal for this game. Now, they didn't have to get out of town, to be fair. They were in Coral Gables, but at the end of the day, they were able to get a win that has been really, really hard to come by for them, which is just a comfortable one that makes sense, one that you don't have to stretch too much in, one that you don't have to have Cam Ward be a superhero in. When you have 40 carries for 130 yards is a huge sign for them going forward. Obviously, not necessarily, the dominating performance on the ground that you absolutely could have had, but the reality is you don't need a lot. When you have Cam Ward in the backside, you do not need a ton from that run game. You just need enough, and they were able to get it. Damian Martinez was absolutely incredible in this game, and they were able to do a ton of the stuff that they needed to do early on in the season, and they're going to need to be able to do the rest of the way if they're going to want to avoid any disaster the rest of the way. But Florida State falls to 1-7, fully out of contention for bowl eligibility, and it's one of the weirdest, one of the worst and craziest downturns that I've ever seen in college football. And I understand with the transfer portal, it adds a lot of more variability here, but this is pretty remarkable. This team is just downright bad. After a year where they just went undefeated and returned quite a few guys on the defensive side of the ball. They're just terrible. It's pretty remarkable to watch every single week because at some point you think maybe they'll turn a corner, maybe they'll be able to figure it out, and then they put up a performance like this. Just absolutely terrible. Now, Luke Kromenhoek did get into the game just a little bit. Maybe that's just a consolation prize at the very least for Florida State fans going forward. But another big-time game that Vegas was just wrong about this one, and I bought in like an idiot. But at the end of the day, BYU gets a huge win over UCF by 13, 37-24, and this was really remarkably dominant from this team, pretty much from start to finish. UCF had to move to their third quarterback on the year, Dylan Risk, who played pretty well. 6 for 10, 102 yards, and a touchdown this game, including a touchdown on the ground. Did really good stuff, but at the end of the season, it's a lost cause. So maybe it's a better sign for the future for that program, but they've been all over the place pretty much from the jump this season, and it did not get any prettier in this game. BYU just continues to do everything. It's one of those teams that I just, for the life of me, cannot figure out because early on in the season, you're talking about this incredible story, and they're going about business, and they're doing really incredible things, and you're thinking, yeah, it's awesome. But you look at the turnover battles, and you look at a couple of the 50-50 plays, and you look at a couple of the bounce of ball type plays, and they're all going BYU's direction. And you're thinking, okay, at some point they're going to find their way back down to earth. At some point they're going to be able to, not win the turnover possession and lose a game and things kind of go haywire. That just hasn't happened. This team just executes at a ridiculously high level. Jake Retzlaff was nearly perfect in this one. They got 250 on the ground, and they did what they tend to do, which is win the turnover battle. It's been absolutely incredible to watch. But at the end of the day, one of those teams that, like Anthony is saying here, they're not getting a lot of respect. And yes, I do think a lot of it is because they play in the Big 12. And it's really hard to get a beat on how good the Big 12 is. You can look around and say there's a lot of good teams. That's why they're battling out at the top. You can also say there's a lot of subpar teams, and that's why they're battling out at the top. So it's really hard to get a beat on the Big 12. The reality is BYU is playing really good football, and BYU is handling the business that's in front of them, and that is all you can ask a team to do. So they're doing something that I never even remotely thought they were capable of doing. And now you look forward the rest of the way. They got Utah, Kansas, Arizona State, and Houston. They should be an undefeated team. If they're able to handle business in those, and we've talked about the Big 12, that is not necessarily a guarantee by any means, but they're handling business in a way that I didn't think they were going to be able to do this late in the season. I'll be totally honest. I thought the LEC was going to catch up to them, and it hasn't quite yet. And they're starting to win games with a little bit less luck every single time. So really remarkable stuff from this team. Cannot say enough about what they've been able to do up there, and you got to keep moving forward. You got 4 games that you should be able to win, but in the Big 12, there's a lot of shoulds, and there's a lot of teams that don't end up following through on that should. So we'll see what happens in that one, but a huge win. They continue to move forward. Another team that was undefeated going into this week with a little bit of worry in their heart was Indiana, and man, did they handle business. There was a couple of moments in this one where you felt like it could get a little bit sketchy, and then Indiana would just respond. And not enough can be said about Taven Jackson in this game, because obviously it's not necessarily a light the scoreboard on fire by any means. 11 for 19, 124 yards, a touchdown, and 1 pick. Was not perfect. At the end of the day, if that's what you're getting, and you're getting the run game and the defense that they've been getting the last couple of weeks, they're going to be more than fine. Even against Michigan State this upcoming weekend, we'll see what happens with the quarterback battle around there. But at the end of the day, I think there's so many things about this Indiana team to love, and they're one of those teams that they're going to just grind you to dust, and that's exactly what they did in this game. They had 52 rushes. They had drives of 19, 14, and 12 plays in this game. That's the formula. When you're not playing with Curtis Rourke, when you don't have that downfield passing threat the way that you used to, you're going to have to be able to run the ball, and that's exactly what they did in this game. It wasn't necessarily prolific. It was just enough to keep those chains moving, to wear this defense down and play a really good game. And then on the other side, D'Angelo Pons, man, the dude's 5'9", undersized, should not necessarily be a guy that's tearing up the Big Ten, and he is dominating the Big Ten. He made 2 just ridiculous plays in this game, had a pick 6 that is kind of a dream, I feel like, for all of us. You just run, they throw the ball right to you, and you're off to the races. But at the end of the day, it was absolutely remarkable to watch this team, and really good stuff from this team. They have another one against Michigan State this upcoming without Nathan Rourke likely. We'll see what happens throughout the week, but they're very much still on track for 11 wins. Maybe even 12 wins with the holes that Ohio State is showing. But let me answer Anthony right here. When it comes to analyzing conferences, I wish there was a little outside person without bias. Absolutely. It's a very, very tough thing to do. And I've been fairly vocal on here saying I do believe the SEC and the Big Ten are the best conferences in the country. I feel like they play the best football. They put the most guys in the NFL. I also feel like we put way too much energy in that direction, and way too much energy, more importantly, I think, in just the way we thought about a team before they go into the season. And I've been trying to kind of rewire my brain throughout this year to go away from that a little bit more, but it's definitely a tough thing to do. They're going to have to figure that out one way or the other, because it is going to keep some teams out of the CFP that probably should be there because they play in the Big 12 or because they play in the ACC, because there's just this preconceived notion that, well, it's the SEC, they're better. And a lot of the cases, that is true. But on the other side of things, there's a lot of teams that are just deserving and very capable of playing at that level that are probably going to be left by the wayside. So definitely something to watch there. And then, Anthony, are there any other top 25 teams from the Big Ten? Because that's what Yeah, I think that's the interesting question with Indiana, right? They haven't necessarily played that team, that one that is going to be able to test you, that one that really kind of proves you've taken that full next step. Obviously, what they're doing has been remarkable, and a lot of different games that could have gone awry have not for this team. But at the end of the day, that game against Ohio State is the one that they're probably going to be measured against. You know, you lose that one by 20 points. A lot of this incredible story, a lot of this, grandiose ideas, I suppose, around Indiana will probably go away pretty quickly. But as of right now, playing really good football, moving forward, doing exactly what you want to do, and then you got a huge game that happened on Friday, all the way back on Friday, which feels like it was ages ago, but Boise State gets a huge win, puts themselves in the driver's seat for that CFP spot from the G5, especially with Notre Dame's win this past weekend, and it was Ashton Jeanty on an off day, 128 yards and a touchdown. I don't know how this guy does it. I still think he is very much at the top of the Heisman race, along with Travis Hunter, and we'll talk about him in the next segment. I can promise you that. But a missed opportunity from UNLV here. The Mountain West is still very much in reach, and you could very well be the team that spoils Boise State's fun at the end of the year if you get back to that Mountain West title and are able to get that win. But at the end of the day, a tough loss for them. Boise State continues to move on and seems to be the team to beat going forward in the G5 race for the CFP. And then you got this one. This one was the slightest bit sketchy for Ole Miss early. Jackson Arnold was actually able to put together good offensive drives for Oklahoma, which feels like an oxymoron. But at the end of the day, they were able to get a couple of touchdowns early in this first half, and then Ole Miss kind of just handled business. Now, the problem with Ole Miss is this is another physical team, another team that caused problems for you on offense, and cannot happen. You had 69 yards rushing in this game. If you get that against UGA or even Arkansas this upcoming weekend, it won't be enough, and you will lose that game, and you'll be sitting there trying to figure out if you're going to go 8-4, 9-3, 7-5. You're in a very weird spot going forward, but if this is the team that is going to be able to hurt you offensively, then Arkansas is going to be able to get to you a little bit, and Georgia is definitely going to be able to get to you, and you need to win both those games. So this team is still very much flawed to me. I think you're looking at another 9-3 season for Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss here, and frankly, unless they fix a lot of the things on their table right now, it could get ugly in that Georgia game. But at the end of the day, still plenty to play for. You get the win. You keep moving forward. You're still in the CFP hunt, but you got one coming up against Georgia that if you play this level of football, it's going to get ugly in a hurry. But let's get to our last break here because we are running just a little bit long here. But let's get to our last break, and then we'll break down all the other games, the ones that we hadn't had a chance to get to throughout the first parts of the show. Texas Tech kind of falls out of the Big 12 race. We had Colorado send a big-time statement to pretty much everyone around the country. So I'll break it down right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about all the top 25 teams, how they fared this past weekend. Oregon obviously making a big time statement, stating their claim as the number one team in the country, at least for the time being. But let's get to a couple other games that we hadn't had a chance to get to in the first parts of the show, and I want to start with a couple of games that happened on Friday. And this is a very interesting one between Louisville and Boston College because Louisville was out of this game. It looked like Boston College was going to totally boat race them. We're going to run away from this one 20-0 up, I believe, early on in the second half, or 27-10 early on in the second half. But, excuse me. But a remarkable performance from Louisville to find their way back in this game. They at least put themselves in a very good position to get bowl eligible, because you look at the rest of their schedule, it's a little bit of a nightmare, but at the end of the day, they were able to get this big-time win, get to 5 wins, and they should have at least one more on their schedule. For Boston College, this is one that you're gonna want back. You're sitting up 27-10 late in the third quarter. You give up 14 straight points and you gain 27 yards on 3 drives in between. So not what you want to do by any means. A tough one to swallow for sure, but at the end of the day, this was a fight between the middle of the ACC at best. This was going to be two teams that have some spoilers ahead, but that's probably about all you're going to get from these two teams the rest of the way. Both play Pitt coming forward. Louisville has Clemson this weekend, and then Boston College has SMU. So there's ability to possibly kind of mess up a couple other team seasons, but as for what these teams are going to do in the ACC or the CFP, not too much, to be totally honest. And then we had another game on Friday. USC finally gets a comfortable win. They get a win that is not necessarily terrifying from start to finish. And this one was a little bit all over the place, but they were up 28-9, and it still felt weird. It still felt like a game that Rutgers possibly could get back in, and they got down 28-20. So they found their way back into this game, and then USA was able to handle business the rest of the way. Mekhi Lemon, the guy on your screen right there, deserves a ton of respect. He's becoming a very dangerous player for this team. 134 yards receiving and a score, 3 returns for 122 yards with an 80-yard kick return in there. Really remarkable stuff from the sophomore, and one of those guys that this USC team, still a very young offense with a first-year starter at quarterback, a lot of young guys at receiver. It's a dangerous group coming back in 2025. So I know this season's been very disappointing, and obviously you're still going to have to finish it very well to feel good about this one. But at the end of the day, you have a lot coming back next year, and Mekhi Lemon seems to be a huge, huge piece for that. But for USC, they got to go on a run the rest of the way. You got at Washington this upcoming weekend, then Nebraska and UCLA at home. You should be able to win all of those games. And if you can win those, you salvage this year just a little bit, get to 7-5 or 7-4, and then you do have a game against Notre Dame. And that would get things pretty much all the way back. If you find a way to finish this season 8-4 as USC, you got to feel really good about where you are going forward, because the first part of the season was downright ugly, but being able to find yourself finish strong can do wonders for yourself in the offseason in recruiting and then just going onto the field in 2025. And then kind of an under-the-radar game in the ACC. Virginia Tech really just rolls defensively in this game over Georgia Tech 21-6, and this Georgia Tech team had no running room all day, and as you can imagine, with that Georgia Tech team, if they can't run the ball, it's going to be a long day. They actually moved to Aaron Philo, the freshman, to take over at quarterback, made some really nice throws, including a beautiful ball downfield, so a little bit of a glimpse for the future. We'll see how quickly that happens with Haynes King's future kind of up in the air right about now. But at the end of the day, for Virginia Tech, it was an ugly offensive performance. Not one that you're going to necessarily love. They didn't get a ton going through the ground or really through the air. They were able to make enough plays, though, and they won the turnover battle 2-0. That's going to make all the difference in a game like this that is a little bit dragged down, a little bit gross from time to time. Being able to get those 1 or 2 plays on the defensive side of the ball makes all of the difference. But at the end of the day, the weird chance that Virginia Tech has to make the ACC title is still very much alive. They only have 1 loss in conference. They are still a team that could get a win over Clemson later on, and then a couple other things fall their way, and they're very much in Charlotte at the end of the year. I know it would be insane to watch, but with this year, I'm not necessarily taking anything for granted. So it could be a crazy finish and would not necessarily put that out of the realm of possibility by any means. And then you move forward to one over in the Big 12. That was absolutely huge for Texas Tech, and they fumbled it away. There's really no other way to put it. Texas Tech was sitting up 34-21 in this game with about 11 minutes to play. They then went punt, fumble, and TCU came back into the game very, very quickly, went up by 1 point, and just never gave it back. Now, on the Texas Tech side, if you want to feel a little bit better about things going forward, Will Hammond came into this game and he wowed. He was 10 for 15, 121 yards and a score. Also got a score on the ground. This is a very, very talented kid that really flashed in a lot of the camps that he went through early on in the recruiting process. If he's your guy going into 2025, you got to feel pretty good if you're a Texas Tech fan. He's a very, very talented player, and frankly, now that you're kind of out of the Big 12 title race, I'd probably play him the rest of the way. But definitely something to watch around there. We'll see what happens. But a huge miss for Texas Tech. One that could have kept you in the Big 12 race, could have kept you right around where Colorado is and right around where Iowa State is, and a lot of these teams weren't given a shot. But at the end of the day, the next 2 weeks, you got Iowa State and Colorado. Somehow you win those two, then things get a little bit more sketchy, and you probably ruin the fun for those two teams. But at the end of the day, it's one of those things that Texas Tech had a golden opportunity early on in the season, and throughout 3 weeks, they've let it kind of slip away. So terrible for them, definitely one that they're going to want back. But at the end of the day, still feels like a program that's slowly moving in the right direction. And with a lot of Big 12 teams looking, at least like it seems, like they're going to fall off a little bit next year, maybe Texas Tech is a team that can step up in 2025. But as for 2024, probably a lost cause at this point. Then we had Auburn, Kentucky, and this was a very, very interesting game because Kentucky scored 10 points in the first 7 minutes of the game. And then they didn't score. They didn't get over 30 yards on a drive until the final drive of the game, and that came up empty. So they got nothing. It's pretty much the long and short of that. And Auburn badly needed this win. If they were going to get to a bowl game, this was a win that they very, very much needed. Now, it's still probably out of reach. With A&M and Bama still on that schedule, only 2 losses would knock you out. You're probably in not so great shape, but you're still alive. That's kind of the important part here. And with Diego Pavia coming into town next weekend, some bad taste in your mouth. No two ways about that. Last time he came in, he totally tore you to pieces as at New Mexico State. Now he's going to be the favorite walking into your building, and it's going to be really interesting to watch that one unfold. But Auburn needs that win just about as badly as really anyone in the country, and Vandy might need that win just about as badly as pretty much anyone in the country. So definitely a fun one to watch. And then Jarquez Hunter is an absolute monster. He's someone that I'm kind of upset that Auburn's not quite as good as they could be, because this kid deserves to be as big of a star as really anyone in the country. 23 carries, 278 yards, 2 touchdowns in this game. He is the entirety of their offense right now, and he's taken on the load. He's been absolutely incredible, and one of those guys that at the next level is going to be just so much fun to watch. But moving forward to that rivalry game that got very chippy towards the end of that one, and a little bit of a scary moment at the end of that one with a fight at center field. But at the end of the day, Michigan gets away with a win in a rivalry game, a huge one for them, and they got a clean quarterback play, which is very few and far between for Michigan the last little bit. But Davis Warren, 123 yards, a touchdown, 13 for 19 passing. Donovan Edwards even threw a touchdown pass. Frankly, I think Donovan Edwards might be the best thrower of the football on that team, but that's totally beside the point. I don't think they're going to put him at quarterback, but both touchdowns did go to Colston Loveland. That's probably just going to be the way that they go about business, passing the ball going forward. It's find number 18, throw the ball in that direction. That's pretty much the game plan going forward for them. Michigan State did a good job of slowing down the run game, which was something that they very badly had to do to win this game. But at the end of the day, Michigan made enough plays. Now Michigan heads into a stretch with Oregon, Indiana, and Ohio State in the next 4 games. Bowl games are fine, but if you don't get to a bowl game, then you're in a really, really tough spot for Michigan. And frankly, you very well could if you just stumble one time throughout the next little bit, because those other 3 teams look like they're guaranteed wins. I don't want to say that, but I'm going to say it. For Washington State, this is kind of an interesting story because early on in the season, we were talking about Washington State. They were undefeated. They had gotten the Apple Cup win. They were doing incredible things. And then things kind of fell off the tracks. They got that one loss. They were kind of reeling for a little bit. They're still 7-1 and still have put themselves in a position where a couple of things need to go their way, but they're still very much in the hunt for the CFP. I think John Mateer is as good a quarterback as there is around the country. He had 19 for 27, 257 through the air, 2 touchdowns, 2 more scores on the ground. The dude is an absolute beast, and whenever you get a chance to watch him, definitely take it. He's so much fun to watch, and one of those players that you very well could see for quite some time around the college football world, because he's an absolute monster. And then I think for Washington State to make it, if we're talking about the crazy CFP scenario, Army needs to lose to Notre Dame, no doubt about that, and then you need something else to happen in the Tulane. You probably need one more loss for Tulane in the American. You need another Boise State loss. If all those things happen, you definitely could be in the hunt. Now, a lot of things do need to happen, and it's going to be a very, very uphill battle, but definitely still in the cards for Washington State, and we'll see if they're just a team of destiny at the end of the day. And then finally, we got to talk about this one. What a performance from Colorado, and they're no longer just a fun story with Dion at the head of it. They're a real football team. They are dominating people start to finish. They are playing really, really good on the defensive side of the ball. It is no longer Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter just being really good and everyone around them being subpar. The people around him are playing really good football too. Travis Hunter played all but 3 snaps, has a career-high 153 yards receiving, had 4 pass breakups, 2 scores through the air. The dude's remarkable. I can't stress enough how little I have seen of a person that can do what he can do. It's absolutely remarkable. I have never seen someone be able to play all but 3 snaps, put up a career high in receiving yards, and break up 4 passes. It should not be possible. He is very much back in the Heisman conversation, and it's him and Ashton Jeanty and everyone else as far as I'm concerned. We can talk about Cam Ward. We can talk about a lot of the quarterbacks that are coming up right now. Those are the 2 guys, and they, no doubt in my mind. I'll put it that way. But for Colorado, you get a bye when you probably need it with a lot of really interesting games coming up because you go to Texas Tech right after the bye. One of those games that you shouldn't lose, you should be favored in, but definitely sketchy. You have Utah at home, another physical team that maybe they can cause a little bit more problems than Cincinnati did up front. At Kansas is a team that hasn't played that great of football, is very dangerous with Jalen Daniels under center, and then Oklahoma State to finish. If they find that run game, then things could get a little bit sketchy. So Colorado's still got plenty ahead of them, and it's going to be a very, very long month for them as they deal with all of the craziness around that program. But they're a very capable team. They should be able to win all of the games ahead of them, and they should be a team that has everything to say about the CFP going forward. So, remarkable. Cannot say enough about how impressed I am of this Dion and this staff overall, because this was a team last year that was nowhere close where they needed to be, and they found a way to get close. And they're not only close, they might just be there. So really remarkable stuff from this coaching staff. I've said it time and again. If you're voting on Coach of the Year and you're not writing Curt Cignetti or Deion Sanders on that paper, you're doing something wrong, because those are the 2 most impressive things that I've seen all year, and there's plenty of impressive coaching jobs, including Mike Elko, like we talked about earlier, but as of right now, those 2 guys have totally separated in my mind, and it'll be incredible to watch them the rest of the season, including Deion, with so much going right for that program that a lot of people would love for not a lot of things to go right. I'm kind of loving seeing everything go right for them. It's been so much fun to watch, but that'll do it for this very lengthy episode of GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have great people covering everything you could possibly want in the world of sports, so come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening for quite some time, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. 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 Mm-hmm.